Hi, this is Bethany Robertson, and I am sharing with you about infusing technology into the library program. In terms of the first step, I came up with a bunch of ideas, including trying to change my research project, gamifying lessons, changing up my poetry slam, creating stations within the library, having makerspace tutorials, also having recommendations that could be book recommendations or genre explanations through video, and also changing up and infusing more technology into my book clubs. And I'll explain a little bit more about these in the upcoming slides. So for the research project, using the idea, and this is from Thomas and Brown in Module 4, quote, "What if questions were more important than answers?" And that quote really stuck with me. I think that was probably focus from this class is really focusing in on asking the right questions and seeing where it leads. And instead of having students search for particular facts, they could work in groups to create the questions using a research tool and make it into their own game, and then maybe swap with other groups. There are lots of different tools they could use for that, like Kahoot, Creative, and I know there are many others as well. I could even post challenges from other classes online, and they could try to complete them at home, and maybe even rank those challenges from the hardest, or maybe what they thought worked really well, and leave feedback for each other. So focusing on the question, I think, also really encapsulates project-based learning, and it also creates more autonomy for students in the research project. However, and this is something I'll have to really work on, is just trying to loosen the reins, because according to Gowron in Module 7, you'll plan to front load tons, but once you jump in, you'll discover that when you hand over the writing of the learning story to your kids, they'll take it far and above any book you'll ever read. And that's something that I could really see and would like to see happen in my classroom. For gamifying lessons, I think it would really ramp up learning because, according again to Thomas and Brown in Module 4, play provides the opportunity to leap, fail, experiment, and continue to play with different outcomes. And I think that's such an essential skill that I would love to focus on. Like I mentioned under the research projects slide, I could gamify the research skills, and that way the students really do become familiar with the tools themselves, so that they can try to stump their players, and then they would have to play the other students' games, so they really become familiar with the tools. And technology, like I had mentioned, could be Kahoot, Socrative, or any one of a number of things. Another idea I had is I do a big unit with second grade teaching mapping tools, and this really got me to think about maybe they could create a scavenger hunt with clues for different places, and they could use to build those scavenger hunts books or websites, and then maybe swap with someone else. So they'd have to research to understand the clue, and then they could potentially pin it on a map using ArcGIS or even Google Earth. So it's a skill that I do think really extends beyond the classroom, or this would allow for building a lot of skills that extend beyond the classroom. And again, according to Thomas and Brown, quote, "The ability to play may be the single most important skill to develop for the 21st century." So I definitely want to support that with what I'm doing, and I do think it would really just be more engaging and interactive for the kids. Okay. Also for my poetry slam, which I already do use a lot of technology for, this is where kids currently learn about different forms of poetry, and then they create their own using Google Slides. And I currently don't have a restriction for the topic, but I was thinking, based on our last face-to-face class, that maybe they could learn about a content area like weather, forces in motion, Puritan trades, and then maybe make a poem based on one of those topics. So The book that Greg shared from the middle school, I think, about the Holocaust really inspired me to do that. So that's a possibility that I could do with that. And students could have, the other thing I was thinking, they really could have a lot more choice in their sharing of poems with different tools. So, for example, Seesaw, they could choose themselves whether they wanted to do text, voice, take a picture, make a drawing, or do video. Or even with Book Creator, they'd have those same options, but they could also even make a comic, do something funky with poetry and the comic form. So in terms of the mood for the poetry slam, I don't really expect the second and third graders to necessarily feel comfortable standing up in front of everybody and being able to recite their poems and capture the mood in their voice, but I tell them that using technology, they could capture the mood with backgrounds and images and colors that they use in the presentation. And this is a quote from Module 9 that Schwartz wrote, quote, "To foster creativity, teachers can make room for more freedom around activities in class and highlight students' ability to be creative achievers." And this is from Builder had said that in that website. So having choices in the design elements and more importantly in the format, like video versus text, if they're using those tools, I do think will help to improve the creativity in my classroom and also the engagement as a byproduct of that. This idea of stations, I'm really intrigued and actually actively want to work on for next year. I think that having different stations for different components of the library lesson or multiple lessons with small groups in some would be really cool to do. In some stations, they could work independently, and maybe some they work together. And I think it would really break up the lecture format and be much more student-driven. That's something I really struggle with because I have, when you take out book checkout time, about 25 minutes to accomplish teaching the students something and then having them do the lesson itself. So it's really a challenge, and I see them every other week. So, and sometimes not for a month, which makes things difficult to accomplish and definitely with continuity. So I think the lecture, I think having stations would really break up having that stagnant format of the lecture. In order to make the stations more efficient, I could, or students could actually make some kind of explanatory videos, and those could be accessible by QR codes at different stations. And in Joshua Davis's article in Module 10, it was said that in 1999, the top 3 skills in demand were teamwork, problem solving, and interpersonal skills. We need schools that are developing these skills. So that to me really means that working in small groups within centers and making myself more of a facilitator could really help to develop these skills. And I do struggle with how that transition happens from the teacher to the facilitator. I think there's a lot of merit to it, but I just feel like I need more practice with that. Also in Sugata Meet Trees, Build a School in the Clouds video, he talks about how students will drive their own learning naturally because they're curious. So having stations, I think, will really allow for students to not only be self-paced, but also to drive their own curiosity. So for my makerspace, I think that it would be really neat for kids to be able to make tutorials for how certain items are made and that others could learn from. For example, some of my kids know how to finger knit, and that's something I have no idea how to do. So they could break it down step by step and record that so that others could from there go build or knit their own things. And it also, I think, is a good sequencing skill, just trying to break things down into chunks for them. When reading Thomas and Brown, who's also in Module 3, I was inspired by discovering students, quote, had formed their own learning community, and they had done it by themselves and for themselves. And that was on page 25. Students were so passionate about learning, they took ownership of it and directed the class, which I think is really an exciting concept and could see that happening in my makerspace. Another quote, questioning and perhaps most important, imagination lie at the very heart of ARC life learning. And that's also Thomas and Brown on page 19. It makes me think more about the club because this will be a time where students can really explore, create, and play. However, it really made me consider how I could combine this and support them in their own online learning. So this was inspired by Alan November's mention of Bob Sprankle's podcasts in Module 5. And he says, quote, "Their Room to Await podcast burst onto the scene several years ago and provided classes with a fantastic model that can be duplicated by others. Weekly, during their snack time, Sprankle students organized, recorded, and edited their podcasts before publishing them to a global audience." So using Seesaw, which I found to be a really effective tool for my elementary students, they could easily do that, and then I could easily just choose the things they've made to go on the blog that others could then look at for a reference. For the video book recommendations, this is where it'd be nice to allow students the opportunity to share their recommendations for different books using video, and these could be shared again with QR codes and also done as their own station. Also, students could explain the components of different genres to assist classmates in choosing just right books with the video, and I would probably locate those near the where those books are in the library. As November says in Students as Contributors, quote, "If our children are to grow up to make important contributions to our society, it is essential that we provide them with powerful tools and experiences across the curriculum." And that's on page 4. Originally, I had thought of keeping these reviews within the school, but they really could easily be shared beyond. And it would kind of be neat to connect with other schools and just develop like a database of book recommendations that the different schools could tap into. Even though I've mentioned these tools before, I like the options and simplicity of, again, Seesaw and Book Creator for these types of projects. I could also use the camera app and just keep it really simple, or I could try the recap site or app that was introduced in our last face-to-face meeting. So there are definitely a lot of options for this. I have several book clubs I meet with that are set up as literature circles, and currently they pick from a list of jobs each week and also include a summary and personal response. So I'm thinking of letting them create their own jobs inspired by project-based learning, or create book reviews or author features so they could highlight an author and some of their books. They could also blog about their books and have discussions or leave feedback or comments for each other online. And I have a quote from Module 2, Godin, quote, "If you do a job where someone tells you exactly what to do, you will find someone cheaper than you to do it. And yet our schools are turning out kids who are stuck looking for jobs where the boss tells them exactly what to do." So I think that letting students decide how best to digest and share their book, I'd be allowing them to give choices. I'd be giving them choices and breaking out of the factory mold a little bit more. And I do think choice is not just making it more exciting, but it's also just expanding their creativity as they do things. So I'm interested to try this out next year with my book clubs. For this, you can see I put the main, what I view as the main ideas in the middle, because I see these central to my lessons. So stations are something that I think I could be doing during library class time that would really be the lessons. Gamifying lessons, of course, is just gamifying what my main lesson would be. and also the research project, which is a huge topic for my library program. Because those are curriculum oriented, I really felt those were central. The poetry slam is a unit that I work on, but it's something that is less central to what I'm doing. Library media, typically is going to be about research skills and accessing media. So this is more of a literature-based fun thing. So that's why I put that off to the side. And then over to the far side, these are where I have the programs that happen outside of library time, or ideas that that aren't central to my actual library lessons. So, and as I was doing this step, I really actually found I could connect things in many, many ways, even more than what I put here. But for example, as I was looking at the link between stations and gamifying lessons, because I really do want to move my style of teaching away from lecture, the stations really are intriguing because I feel like there's so many different possibilities, and kids could work on many lessons that are student driven or in a small group. And one of those stations could always be a lesson that has been gamified. For the link between restructuring the research project and book recommendations, as I thought about this process and was trying to determine connections, I realized I could potentially connect the research project that I'm required to do with every class with book genres and authors. So the topic of research projects could be genres or individual authors that fall under a certain genre. Just like in the book club and book recommendation connection, the information researched on genres and authors could also serve a purpose to introduce other students to new reading material if it's displayed somewhere. And that really does overlap what I was about to say with restructuring book clubs and book recommendations. Because students are choosing their own book, even if it's different from others, it makes the weekly discussion different. So they could make book trailers and highlight an author as well, or compare books within a genre even. And like the video book explanation, the video recommendations that I had mentioned, they could explain the genre itself using all kinds of technology. And these could be available for other students to view with QR codes. So the idea that I wanted to spend more time on, actually really ideas, because I did like the connection that came with the stations in gamifying, was that really all stations could be part of one game in which a small group completes, and that could be step one, and then all the groups could come together with their piece to solve the whole class puzzle. And there was actually a really great session that I attended during our digital learning day, and as a group we had to solve several puzzles, and there were a lot of resources at a website. It was called Breakout EDU, so that's something I really want to explore more. As they're working, it could be under the guise of a mystery that needs to be solved, and one group could use online encyclopedias while others use books. Another could use search engines or online magazines to solve their own piece of the puzzle. And when they do come together, they could share their clues and use their tools again to solve the big mystery. Or, as I mentioned before, a station could just be an independent gamified lesson. So there's a whole range of possibility here, and it could also be the kind of thing that from unit to unit I change. So, and now I went through the process again, trying to whittle down and be a little more specific. And focusing on stations and gamifying, I'm not sure if I did this right. I feel like I did it wrong, but this was the idea I really wanted to spend more time on, was looking at stations As I mentioned, the possibility of them working independently or in a small group, that has a lot of flexibility. But also, when I just started brainstorming, these were different stations that I could have throughout the year. I might not have this many, or they could just be rotated throughout the year. And the students, maybe they only get to 2 stations one class, and then the next class they get to 2 others. I'm not sure how that would look yet. But I think a programming station where they're doing coding could be really valuable. A making station, and they could also share their learning, perhaps with Seesaw. A skills station, a literature station, or read alouds. Also a main lesson station, and possibly an author study. And I just like that idea. I don't want to stand up in front of the class telling them how to do all of this stuff. If they can learn on their own with a basic prompt at each station, whether it's video or other instructions, and available with QR code, I think it would be really helpful. With gamifying, as I mentioned, I could do it with the research skills lesson. And as I also mentioned, kids could create a scavenger hunt mystery for the mapping unit. Also, another unit I do is a digital citizenship game, and that's where kids could possibly make their own choose your own adventure. So that's another big content area that I could focus on and ramp it up with gamifying it. And there are others. I think this is an area over the summer, especially because I do want to change my entire curriculum, that I need to spend more time on, and I think more content areas or ideas will come to me for this. When sorting these, this is where I really felt like the meat of what I needed to do was with my main lesson, and then perhaps sorting skills that support that main lesson would be central. And then off to the side but closer would be a literature station, and maybe an author study station. So those are the classroom content and supporting it. And then further off could be the making station and programming station. When I did this one, this is basically, I know I didn't have to, but as I was doing it, I just felt like I really could connect everything here, and that idea really excited me. And this kind of drove my thinking for when I do work on my curriculum this summer. Maybe this is how I do it. I just think of a theme and I see how I can support it into different stations. So for this, I picked the folktales theme. That's something that I do a lot with for second grade, and each station could be supporting that theme itself. So if folktales is my theme, then this could be a breakdown of the stations. For my main lesson, kids could learn what a folktale is. For the skills station, kids could maybe do a guessing game or find evidence that supports whether something is a folktale or not. For the literature station, they could listen to different podcasts of people reading folktales. The author study, they could learn about authors that are really well known for folktales, Hans Christian Andersen, or even current day authors who retell folktales like James Marshall. Programming, I was thinking that we could have the Dash robot pretending that is Little Red Riding Hood, and create a course to go through the woods like Little Red Riding Hood did. So maybe there were obstacles along the way. Where in the map does the wolf come out or see Little Red Riding Hood? And then how does the robot go through that course? How do you program it to move through? And then for the making station, I thought it'd be really cool to pretend that the kids could pretend that they're one of the pigs in the Three Little Pigs and make a house using straws. And maybe they're also given 1 foot of tape that won't blow, and they have to test to see what is a strong design and won't just blow down when the wolf comes. So I actually really think I want to do this. I liked this idea a lot. So for the main lesson, where they are coming up with the definition of a folktale or learning what a folktale is, I could post clues that once they are solved, they could unlock a box with one component of the folktale definition. So there could be several boxes or clues, and that could lead them to learning more about what the ultimate lesson is, and that would make it into a more interactive game. For the skills finding station, where they're finding evidence of a folktale, they can create a book of evidence in Book Creator, and they can take a picture of the sentence, or they could type on the page, and then they could record and justify why it is evidence. For the literature station, they could listen to different folktales, and after hearing one, maybe they could reinvent it into a comic using Book Creator or Make-Believe Comics. And for making the straw house, students could even catalog their thought process or the different prototypes they make of straw houses, what works, what doesn't, and again, maybe they use Seesaw to keep track of all of that. So I really did find this process valuable, and like I said, I was inspired because I think it really will help to drive my curriculum work this summer, and I'm going to use this stuff. I think it's really great. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.